important to acknowledge why this study is useful for us, and also why the speeches by the two journalists, Kayumba and the other journalist this morning, was so important, because it's very easy for us to forget what these practices were and how systematic they were from the moment of taking someone. I wouldn't say even arresting. We've heard these descriptions that people were picked up from their homes, blindfolded, driven around. The official arrest came much later, sometimes one day, sometimes more than one day. And then after the arrest, again, the same practices being produced before courts which routinely denied bail. We heard about people who were spending, even in July 24, more than 50% of the cases that were filed against journalists were under investigation. So it's very clear that these cases are not meant to go to a final decision ever. They're just kept hanging over people's heads to stop them from writing, to stop them from speaking, and sometimes to stop you from even thinking the kinds of things you can say, not even articulating them in private. So I think this report will be valuable for us, not only for the recommendations, and I'll come to that, but I think for the fact it's laid out in detail, case by case. We have 30 cases, I think, where we have all of the details, which it is very difficult, I think, for anyone to refute. And particularly now, when we're hearing so much disinformation from around the globe and inside our mobile phones on social media about what is the situation in Bangladesh, what is the change, acknowledging all of the many challenges we face with the changes, it's important for us to remember where we're coming from. We didn't come from a golden age 1 year ago. We came from a time of extreme darkness. We may not be in a golden age right now, but we're in a time of, in some ways, less darkness. I think we have to acknowledge that. That's really important. In terms of the practices, Roman, that you asked about, I think, again, they're well detailed in this report, and we heard clearly about them this morning as well. I want to just speak a bit about what we've seen in court, actually, and maybe before that also about the police, because there are changes now in place that should prevent the same kind of police action. For example, there was, I think, something you can update in the report. You mentioned that the guidelines that the Supreme Court had given for arrest without warrant in the Blast judgment are pending implementation. But actually, the amendment to the CRPC has been made this year, and many of those guidelines have already been incorporated. So that's a big step forward. But where there's not so much of a step forward is whether we have full implementation of that new amendment. And I think, unfortunately, as journalists, many of you will know, we still have many cases where that is not being effectively implemented and we don't have protections in place. But at least in terms of the legal framework, we're a big step forward. Another thing, I think, because there have been cases this year about holding the police to account, at least cases filed and actions initiated to hold the police to account in relation to past abuses, I think we've seen less cases. Certainly, I don't think we've seen cases, except in relation to July killing cases. We've not seen the same patterns of arrest of journalists. You can correct me, but I think we've not seen exactly the same thing as we've seen in the past. I think there's a change, and we can track that change positively. On judicial practices, I think, I would have liked to see a bit more in the report about the analysis, actually, of what happened in the courts. And I would recommend to Clooney Foundation and to CGS that you please consider analyzing the judicial orders in these cases a little bit more, from the magistrates' court upwards. Because you talked about the impunity for the police, lack of accountability for the police. But I think we also have to think about the role of judges. Again, just looking at the positives first, I think we can see it's a mixed picture. I'm not going to say that we're in a golden age. Maybe the Attorney General will say that. I'll leave that to him. But I think it's a mixed picture, and I really do want to acknowledge the positive changes. My experience of dealing with not the DSA, but the ICT, and in some extent the DSA also, was, as many of you know, in Dr. Shahid Al-Alam's case. And I think that was an important case for us to keep on reflecting on, because for 7 long years, we could not get a court to look at the very obvious point in this case, obvious to anyone without any law degree, that if a later law has repealed an offense, you can't be tried under it anymore. Very simple, straightforward point. ICT Section 57, it was repealed under DSA, and the DSA clearly said, unless the case has finalized investigation, gone to trial, case cannot continue. Right? It's pretty simple. I think everyone in this room understands that. With the Attorney General and several other lawyers, when he was not Attorney General, when he was also a human rights lawyer a year ago, or more than a year ago, 7 years ago, we fought this point through court after court, and we got one initial brave court that heard our argument, and then every court, up to the appellate division, perversely refused to accept that this was a reasonable argument and kept a case going. And as I think the journalist who spoke earlier mentioned, it wasn't just that a case kept going, every other thing that also happens on the side of it kept happening. So that person, Dr. Alam faced his tax files being pulled repeatedly and questioned. He faced questions about, some of you will have gone to the Thrik building, I think, in Panthapoth. They faced multiple inquiries from Rajuk about building issues. Any manner of things that they could be harassed with, they were harassed with. And in relation to the court procedure also, the levels of harassment, I think, were so petty. It's important to think what level actually a state can bring itself down to when it decides it's no longer a state, but it's reflecting just extreme political enmity and personal enmity. So not only was this case kept hanging all these years, but even when we asked the court to do, again, a very simple thing, to allow, because the case was being investigated for 7 long years, nothing was happening, we asked the court that can Dr. Alam at least be exempted from having to appear in person, from Hajira, from giving his Hajira in the court every month, because it's a big waste of time going down. Then also, unlike all of us, he flies around the world all the time doing exhibitions and taking photographs. So for his professional reasons, he needed to be abroad. Not only did the magistrate refuse to give the order, not only did the sessions judge refuse to give the order, when we came to the High Court and the judge was thinking he might give the order, who appeared in the court? The former Learned Attorney General. And the Attorney General felt it was very important for the government to stop this one person traveling around the world. There were no other important matters that day. He had to deal with this and had to stop him traveling. So I think that is the situation, as I said, we have moved away from, I hope, that we don't now have in every case Attorney General appearing to block this or that and the other. And we have a different environment, but where we have to see, I think, where we have to question and where we need more work done is to see how much space has opened up for courts and how much hasn't. So in some cases from the past, like Dr. Shahid Al-Alam's, where we couldn't get a hearing for 7 years or a fair hearing or a fair outcome, after July 24, we have got getting a hearing. We have a judge who has been able to hear the matter, and was able to hear the matter in a rational way, to look at the reasons, see whether they're reasonable or not, give a decision, and has given actually a very valuable and useful decision. And we also, I do thank the Attorney General for also appearing in that matter with us and supporting us. But we're also seeing that judges retain, I think, that lack of confidence and lack of assertion. So there have been cases, even now, of journalists who have spent a long time in detention under cases to do with freedom of expression.